Hey, welcome to the Gaming Bench. Today I'm going to be building an old English pub game called, and apologies up front to any English viewers for my pronunciation, Shuffleboard. This is a fun and simple game for 2 or more players. If you want to learn more about the rules, history, and strategy of the game, I have a video that covers all of that, including the predecessor of this game, Shuffleboard, linked in the description below. I'm making this as a gift for some friends that run a gaming magazine. They've been good enough to publish some of my articles in the past. So one of the first things I'm going to do is give this to a friend of mine who has a laser engraver so that he can engrave the logo of the magazine on the front, as well as some numbers down the front of it. The way the game works is you shove a coin forward and try to get it to land between 2 of these lines. This is called a bed. So the width of the bed really depends on the coin you're using. For this version that I made, I bought some 1980s era 1-pound English coins, and you can see that there's a fair amount of space between there. I didn't want it to be too hard of a game. Now, for this version, I've drawn in the spacing I think I'm going to use, and if you use a US quarter, it's pretty generous. It's not going to be that hard of a game. But if you want to play a more challenging game, you can use a US $50, and you can see that it just barely fits in there. And the old Shuffleboard games that we have, this is how they were designed, so that it was really a pretty challenging game. But again, since it's a gift, I don't want it to be frustratingly hard to play, so I'll cut both of these lines. And I'm just going to cut some really shallow grooves with my table saw. And here's some grooves cut into the board. You can see the quarter fits nicely between the 2 lines. Gives a little bit of room. The reason you want to cut grooves in the board instead of just painting and drawing on lines is if there's ever a question if a coin is in play or not, you can take another coin and run it down the groove, and if the coin moves at all, it doesn't count. Lost some footage here, but nothing that really matters. I just got the board back from my friend with the logo laser engraved on it, and then I cut and glued on the frame around the outside of the board. We'll jump back in with the glue up. All right, glued up all 4 sides of this, and I'm pretty happy with this. There's just a tiny bit of a lip right here that I'm going to try to sand down a little bit. Like I said, I need to be really careful because I'm going to sand right through this veneer, and I don't want it to look crappy. So I have some 220 grit sandpaper that I'm going to do very carefully. Try to even out this line and knock off any tiny remnants of glue squeeze out. Next, I need to put a backstop on this just to prevent the coins from flying off the table. I have a piece of pine that I've cut oversized, and I want to cut a curve into it just so it looks a little nicer. And I'll do that with my jigsaw. I drew a curve on this just by bending a thin piece of stock, and then got a wife assist, and she drew the line on the outside. Now I'm just going to use my jigsaw, cut the line. Cut this to size so it fits here. I chamfered the edges of the back end of this just to make them look a little more interesting. Then the last thing I did was I used a bowl cutting bit on my router bit and cut a little channel right here because you'll need a place to keep your chalk when you're keeping score. So now I'm just going to glue this down, and then I'll move on to finish. While I was waiting for the glue to dry, I did a test with some of the stains I have in my shop. I'm staining 2 different kinds of wood because the board itself is made out of this birch ply, and the frame is made out of just this pine, and each takes the stain a little bit different. So out of these, I think this gunstock is a little too orange for my liking, and I like both the Early American and the Golden Oak, but I'm afraid that if it's too dark, it's going to obscure the engraving on the board. So I'm going to forego the Early American, and I think, well, I also tried just a clear coat finish, which I knew I wasn't going to like because I hate the pale white of unfinished, unstained pine. So I'm going to go with this, the Golden Oak. All right, glue's dried on this, and one thing I almost forgot is that I need to put a cleat on the back of this because the board, you need a cleat right here so the edge of the table can rest on it, so there's some resistance when you're pushing against it. So this is just some more of that pine. I'm going to, I think, attach it with dowels, which is probably a little overkill. It's not going to have that much pressure on it. The wood glue would probably be enough, but, you know, better safe than sorry. The only dowel rod I have sitting around is this 1/2-inch dowel, and it's pretty butch for this purpose, but like I said, it's what I have. So I drilled 2 1/2-inch holes into this cleat, and I'm going to use these centering points. I'm pretty excited because I bought these a while ago, and I haven't had a chance to use them before. They're just little metal spikes that go in the hole, and then you flip it over and press it into the wood, and that tells you where to drill the corresponding holes for the dowels. Pretty slick. Now for stain. So you definitely want to wear gloves for this part of the process because it's going to get messy and get all over your hands. Of course, I looked into my cabinet and found out that I only had 1 rubber glove left, so this might get kind of messy. You just want to kind of slop the stain all over the board, let it soak into the wood for a second, and then it's important that you wipe it off because if the stain dries on top of the wood, it gives it this weird glossy look that you don't want. And I want to make sure I get all the stain out of the grooves. So I'm just going to take a dull pencil and this paper towel and rub it in there and see if I can get it all out. All right, that looks pretty good. The stain is still tacky. You want to let it dry for a couple hours. I'll probably let this dry overnight to make sure that it's fully cured before I go on to the next step, which is the clear coat. The last thing I need to do to call this done is to add some chalk panels to the sides like I did with this board that I had made previously. You use a piece of chalk and keep score on the sides here. And to do this, I'm going to use this chalkboard paint. I was admittedly dubious when I bought this of how well it would work. I really assumed that it would either flake off or it would be impossible to get the chalk off it a while, but I've had this for nearly a year and it works great. I'm super impressed with how it works. So what I'm going to do is tape off all these sections and then just add the paint. When I was planning this, I really debated if I should put the chalkboard paint down first on the raw wood or finish it first. I decided to finish the whole thing first because I assumed putting the polyurethane over the chalkboard paint would not be good for the chalkboard paint. So now I'm just going to scuff up these squares a little bit and hopefully I'll get good adhesion with the paint on these squares. Adhesion, Persian. What are you talking about? This stuff is self-leveling to a certain extent, so I'm not too concerned about being super neat with it, and I'll probably put on 2 or 3 coats to get really good coverage. The can says it's completely dry in 2 to 4 hours, but it's rather cold in my shop today, so I'm going to let it go for a little longer. And this stuff is water soluble, so clean up with soap and water. All right, the chalkboard paint is dry, and so I'm going to pull off the tape. I'm not sure how this is going to go. I hope it leaves a nice clean line, but I'm afraid it might flake off because it's so thick. Let's find out. All right. Looks like the paint bled under the tape a little bit, but not that bad. Let's scrape that off. You know, it looks decent. Yeah, it'll definitely need a little bit of cleanup work, but not so bad. I'm pretty pleased with that. Hopefully the other side will be as clean. Cleaned up the chalkboard paint, glued the rules on the back, and this board's all ready to go. Real happy with the way this turned out. Finish looks good, and the laser engraving really makes the board, I think. Thanks again, Ken. I'm anxious to give this to my friends at Fables and Tables magazine. They've been good enough to publish a bunch of my articles about ancient games. So since I was making a new board, I thought it'd be a nice gift for them. If you're interested, their magazine's available in a bunch of Central Ohio gaming shop, and you can also read current and back issues for free at fablesandtablesmagazine.com. As always, if you like this sort of stuff, please subscribe. I put out new videos the second and fourth Thursday of every month, one on the rules, history, and strategy of an ancient game, and one showing how I make the game. So I hope to see you next time here on The Gaming Bench.